Bob was on with me. Well, we were with a bunch of people for the trip in Ecuador, and this is a bouquet of Drymonia. So we're going to talk about pollinating and seed harvesting today. And this is a twofold thing to teach people how to pollinate their plants, not only to possibly get seed for the seed fund, but also if you're interested in hybridizing. Okay, so the biggest thing about doing the pollination is to learn the different stages of the flower blooming, because if you don't know those, then you're going to not be able to successfully pollinate your flower. So the stamen is the male part of the flower, and it has the anther, which holds the pollen, and the filament that holds the anther up. And then the pistil is the female part of the plant, and that has three parts: the stigma, where the pollen is placed, the style, which is the stem, and then the ovary that holds the seed. So when flowers first open, they're in the male stage. So the pollen is when the pollen is ripe. And this, depending on the flower and the species, that generally lasts 1 to 2 days. And anytime during that time, you can collect pollen. And generally, if I send pollen to somebody, I will just clip the filaments, leaving the anthers together, and I put them on a dark piece of paper and then just fold that up and then put it in either an envelope or something, and that can be stored. Dale said on Thursday night that she just had AV pollen that was 5 or 6 years old that she's just had in a drawer, and she just pollinated one of her violets with it. So she's interested to see if the pollen is still good. And if you watch your flowers, you'll see that the pollen sacs will start to decline, and in some flowers will actually be drawn back into the flower, and the stigma will start elongating. And at that time, that's when some plants will self-pollinate, when the two things pass each other. So this is a Syninga. Okay, so how can I change the grid so it's not covering my, never mind.
I'm kind of looking at that right now.
Yeah, I did it. I got rid of it.
Yeah, hide video panel.
Yeah, so this is a picture of Syninga sulcata, which is a tall growing Syninga, and it shows the different stages. Number 1 is the male stage, which shows the pollen, which is right here. And then 2 is still in the male stage, is at its peak. So you can see the flower just opened and the pollen is right here, but this is it's right out, so that it will, any of the pollinators, which in this case is mostly hummingbirds, that'll brush on the feathers, so that the next time when they go to the next flower and it's in the female stage, which is number 3 here, they'll brush the pollen on the stigma. So these 2 or 3 are all in the female stage, and you would start, as soon as you see these, that's when you want to start putting the pollen on it. And here's some pictures of Dale's showing this is the stigma of Achimenes, and you can see like this, it's just starting to come into its peak stage, and here it is. So you just have to get familiar with how the stigmas look. Some of them will open like that. Calaria do the same thing, and others will remain just a little bump, and they'll get like a dimple in the center of it. And the lower picture shows how on an Achimenes flower, how the anthers are drawn back into the flower as the stigma is coming out. And here's some other pictures here. Now you can see these anthers are very waxy looking, and I doubt very much that there was any pollen in there. And if that's the case, which it is in many hybrids, you would call that male sterile. And the lower picture is of a calumnia flower, and you could see the pollen is right near the stigma. And here's calarias. Calarias are really easy to see when the stigma's ready, because they just, I call it opening up, not to get gross or graphic or anything, but it's like, you know, they're opening up their legs.
Mhm.
I'm ready.
Yeah, and you can take a brush or a toothpick to put the pollen on. You could put pollen on your finger and shove it onto the stigma, or you can actually take the pollen sac and shove it into the onto the stigma. But you want to do that over a couple of days to make sure that you get fertilization. And this is Nematanthus wehrlei, and you can see that the pollen's dropped on the petal here. And the stigma doesn't split on this. It's got like a little dimple here. So it will, when it first appears, when the stigma first appears, it's just completely flat, and then when it's ready, it gets that little dimple on it. And these are Gesneriad. And it's interesting. I have this Gesneriad blooming right now, and it's got plenty of pollen anthers, and this time it decided to not grow any stigmas for some reason. I have no idea why, but and I had a Primalina species that had no pollen sacs at all. I mean, they had pollen sacs, but no pollen. So humidity has a lot to do with it, not only in the forming of the anthers and the stigma, but also with successful pollination. And here's some more Syningia flowers. Syningias are really cool because a lot of them, once the pollination is successful, the actual flower stem will move away from the other flowers. This is called a veggie bee, which was originally invented, I guess, for pollinating tomato plants if there's no insects around. And it comes with this little spoon, so that, and it's basically what it is a vibrator. So some people have used their old electric toothbrushes and put a brush in it, in the holder part. And so this just vibrates when you turn it on. And so you hold it by the pollen, the anthers, and the pollen then comes down onto, they provide the spoon. But if you make your own, you can just use a piece of paper or something. So here's this demonstrating how I put this into a Primalina flower. And what's really cool is that the pollen falls down onto the petal and slides down to the petal, and I just hold the spoon underneath it to collect it. And here's the pollen. It's very fine. And again, just like Gesneriad seed, some pollen is finer than others. And here's, I've collected the anthers, and that just shows, I would have used darker paper just so that you can see where the pollen is if any of it shakes out of there. And here's some more pictures. So you can just grab this anther and put it on the stigma. Of course, you want this attached to the plant, but
That would help.
It was a lot easier for me to take a picture of it this way, not attached to the plant. I'm not an octopus. I only have 2 hands.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a Petrocosmia, and most of the time you really have to almost tear the whole flower apart to get to the anthers and to get to the stigma. And you have to do that with some flowers because the flower, the anthers and the stigma are internal inside the flower. And what's neat is when you remove these and you kind of, I'll take 2 of them and just kind of hold them between my fingernails and squish them, and the pollen just flings out. And what's interesting is with the St. Paulia flowers, to me, there's no, no really distinguishing stage, like the stigma doesn't grow, the pollen sacs don't withdraw. They're all there from the time the flower opens, it's all visible. So you just have to start removing the pollen like within a day or 2 days after the flowers open, and then just keep sticking the pollen onto the stigma.
Karen?
Yes.
The one thing that I do know with the St. Paulia that I used to do is with the stigma, you can actually, if you have a magnifying glass, when the stigma is ready, you can actually, you can look at with the magnifying glass, there a lot of times there'll be a little dot of sticky fluid that forms on the end of the stigma.
Oh, okay.
Then that's when you know that it's at the right point.
And does it have a dimple on the end?
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But the most striking thing when I always knew when it was the right time is when there's the end of it, the stigma gets like sticky fluid on it. It literally will start to glisten, and you get a lot of times a little droplet at the end of the stigma that says this is, it's the right time, the best time to do it.
That's interesting. I've just over a period of several days, just keep putting pollen on it. And eventually, just like the lower right picture, all of a sudden it sticks. So if I had used my magnifying glass, then I would have saved myself some attempts.
Yeah, I learned that, I can't remember from whom, but you really can see it if you have a magnifying glass.
And I find that the pollen on violets is much more waxy than on other. It's not. It's more sticky, I think. It doesn't seem to be as powdery as like the columnia up above.
Yeah, I'd agree.
And this is a strep flower, and you can see this has this dimple on it. So when it first comes out, it's a flat surface, and then when it's ready, it has a dimple on it. So you just kind of have to, whatever you want to pollinate is just watch it and see how the changes happen. But this is a good example also of how streps, even hybrids, self-pollinate themselves as the anthers are drawing back and the stigma is growing forward. They get to a point where they actually rub together and that they self-pollinate. So if you want to create hybrids and you have a plant that has a tendency of doing that, then you want to make sure that you remove the pollen from that flower before the stigma matures, so that you can guarantee that self-pollination hasn't happened. The micro miniature Syninga pusilla pollinates itself even before the flower has opened. So hybridizers that have used those micro minis for hybridizing actually will cut the flower open before it normally is ready to open, so that they can ensure that it has not pollinated itself. So here's some pictures that Dale's a great close-up photographer, and these are her pictures showing her stuffing the pollen into the stigma. And here's another shot. Now, in her program on Thursday night, she has been starting to do some hybridizing with bicolor strep plants with bicolored flowers. And she has found that they all have deformed stigmas. So she learned that she takes a razor blade and cuts that deformed tip off the stigma. And if it doesn't ooze a liquid, she will take a cut African violet leaf, and take the juice of that and put it on the end of the stigma and then put pollen on it, because as Doug had said, a lot of plants need to have that wet surface for the pollen to stick. So once you've applied the pollen, how can you tell that your pollination has been successful? So as I said, with a lot of the syningas that have hanging flowers, you can tell right away, because you can see all these are drooping here like this. Once they're pollinated, they move straight up. And I guess it's nature's way of getting them out of the way of the pollinators. So it's pretty interesting. There's quite a number of syningas that do this. And this is Parisiana. And this is Syninga calcarea. And these are actually little sugar like nectars. I guess it's the nectar has dried up into these little sugar balls, but it kind of makes it look like an alien.
Yeah.
And these are Primalina. They don't move up as much, but they start fattening fairly quickly. So you can see these are this is just starting, and this is getting a little bit fatter, and then these are fatter. And this is Petrocosmia. So they, again, fat, and you can do the same thing with the violets. They will start fattening up. when pollination has been successful. Of course, there's always a false pregnancy, could be a false pregnancy, which has happened to me a couple of times. So these are some St. Paulia seed pods. And they're pretty cool because they come in different hairiness and shapes and colors. This is a Henkelia seed pod. And then some plants get berries. All columnia have berries, or most of them have berries anyway. And when you have a berry, you can, you watch it and this will start getting translucent, and then you can see the seed inside. And then it's just like picking tomatoes or something. Like if you tug on it and it doesn't, the berry doesn't come off, it's not ripe yet. And then other plants have what are called display fruits or fleshy capsules. And they're advertising some kind of critter to come and eat that wonderful looking anemone fruit. And then the seed goes through their digestive system, and that's how the seed is dispersed. And here's a few more. I made the mistake of waiting for this to dry. And the mistake was that once it dried, I took a devil of a time to get the seed separated from this material, which I'm sure that there's a name of, but I can't think of it right at the moment. And Escanantha seed pods are very long. I made the mistake of, well, someone told me my green pods would be ripe when they started turning brown, except for they never turned brown. And they're just like dandelions. They have fuzz, the seeds attached to a fuzz, and that comes out and flies away and then finds a place to make a home. So I had that dandelion stuff flying all over the plant room. So now what I do is I will take a paper envelope and put the seed pod into it. I tried plastic bags, but then it's hard to get all the seed out of the plastic bags. And then like streptocarpus, which means twisted fruit, the seed pod twists open and that flings the seed out. And here's the seed. Dale cut open the berry so that you could see the seed inside. So when you get a fleshy capsule or display fruit, once it opens up, then you want to scrape all that seed off, smear it on a piece of paper and let it dry. And then once it's dry, you can just rub your hand over the seed, and you don't have to, it's much easier to separate it from all this gelatinous material here. And then some seed pods have what we call splash cups. So they will split open with the seeds facing up so that water will drop on them and splash the seeds out. And that's the way they disperse the seed. So some of them aren't as, this kind of springs open when it's ripe. Sometimes you need something to hit the plant for it to pop open. If you've ever seen seed pods on impatiens or jewelweed, if you touch it, it just flings open. It's pretty cool. And I remember somebody had sent me a diastema seed in the pod, and they said that it looked a little weird to them. So what had happened was the seed it must have been in high humidity. the seed germinated, like in Dale's picture in the top here. And then they might have harvested the seed pod and left it to dry, and all the little plants dried up. So it wasn't any good. So you just have to keep an eye on it. And once these start splitting open, then you can harvest that seed pod. And I use a little paper drink cups, and I can just write the name of the plant and the date that I harvest the seed right on it, and then allow the seed and the pod to dry a couple more days. So here's some more. There's even splash cups with Syninga, which is interesting. And here's your twisted fruit on a Streptocarpus, but Ornithoboea also have twisted fruit, which is right here. And here's another one. So it's just their way of dispersing their seed. So the biggest question, or the question that we have the most is, well, how long does it take for a seed pod to mature? And that depends on the plant. Syninga and Streptocarpus can take a month, 2 months. St. Paulia can take 6 to 9 months. So because we've had no shows, I've been pollinating my species plants because we all know judges don't like seeing seed pods on plants. So I've taken advantage of the show hiatus to get some seed into the seed fund of St. Paulia species. So we have a Paraboea that has another twisted fruit here. And some seed pods don't relinquish their seed easily. So you actually have to go in with like a tweezer or a toothpick or something. And like you can see here on this bottom edge, the seed is hiding underneath this flap. And St. Paulia seed pods kind of have the same thing. So it's not like a Syninga seed pod. When you crack that open, the seed just falls out. Hemiboea and St. Paulia don't. You have, and Primalina as well. They don't easily come out. And this is just shows you the side. If anybody hasn't seen Gesneriad seed, most of it is very tiny. So you don't want to be sneezing if you're working with it, or else you just blow them all over the place. But this shows the Nautilus seed has some of that material because it had a fleshy capsule on it, so it hangs on to the seed. And here's what I was telling you about the St. Paulia seed pod. You know, you have to pry this out, the seed out of here. So when I'm cleaning seed for the seed fund or for myself, I use paper plates that don't have a waxy surface, and I will put the seed on that, and then I kind of jiggle it around like you would panning for gold, that kind of motion, and that separates the seed from the chaff. If you're doing it for yourself, you don't have to be as picky, but we try and keep the seed that I send to the seed fund, I try and make that as clean as possible. And a lot of times we get donations from people, and the seed, it looks like it's good seed, but if you look at it under a microscope, not a microscope, a magnifying glass, it's not a viable seed.
How
And
long will the seed last?
That, again, it depends on the species. Syninga seed doesn't have as long of a shelf life as like Gesneriad seed, but it doesn't mean you won't get any germination. It just might be that if you have 20 seeds, maybe you only get 2 seeds to germinate if it's more than a year old. It's recommended to keep it dry and refrigerated to keep it viable. But I had strep, Syninga, and Gesneriad seed that was between 15 and 20 years old that hadn't been refrigerated the whole time, and I got very good germination on the Gesneriad and some germination on the other. So it's a matter of how good the seed was to begin with and how it was stored, as to how good it's going to be. You can use any kind of paper. The worst thing is when people Scotch tape, use Scotch tape to close seed packets, because no matter how careful, it's a pain to get the Scotch tape off the paper. And sometimes seed gets caught up onto the sticky part of the Scotch tape, and then you can't get it off. So it's just easy to start out. We use the perm papers for rolling the hair for permanence, but you can use tissue paper or regular paper, and you just you fold it in half, and I don't put it in the paper until I fold one end over twice, so that you have kind of like a funnel type of thing. And then I put the seed in the paper, fold the other side over twice, and then here, and then fold the top part opened up twice. If you fold it that way, if it's tissue paper, you don't need to use any kind of tape, because it will stay closed. If you use heavy paper, then you can just put one little piece of tape on it. But I store all we also use glassine envelopes that we put the papers in, but you can put that into a regular mailing envelope and then put it in a plastic baggie and keep that into the refrigerator. You don't want to put seed directly into a plastic bag, because the static electricity will make that seed stick to the plastic, and it's really hard to get it off. So this is how we like to have the labeling your seed. If it's a species, you just put the whole thing out. You don't want to just use an initial, because P could be a lot of different species. It's just like, it drives me crazy when I'm doing entries and somebody puts S period. Well, what does that mean? Is it a strep? Is it a Syninga? Yeah. If you're doing a hybrid, then you would put, the mother plant, that the pollen usually goes first with the plant that supplied the pollen second. And then we always ask people to put the date that they harvest. It doesn't necessarily, you don't have to know the actual day, but the month and the year is good, because then that lets us know how old the seed is. So I hope that I'm going to unshare I hope that helps take the mystery a little bit out of pollinating your plants. It's kind of fun. I really enjoy it. I've got a couple of Syninga and Primalina hybrids coming along, but
I've done African violets and streps, but I'm very new pretty much to the other Gesneriads, and that was really interesting. Thank you.
And just if you're hybridizing, just like with violets, it's a good idea. I mean, if you're just doing it for fun and you happen to have two plants blooming at the same time, which a lot of people, that's how they start. They go, oh, you know, I'll just stick pollen. But if you're serious about hybridizing, it's always good to have some kind of a plan and start out with good parents, because you know, if you don't start out with good parents, I don't think you're going to have good progeny. So if you're looking for something with, like at violets, if you're looking for good symmetry, I would think you'd want to start out with a plants that have good symmetry.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Just a comment that I agree with that, because what I do is I tend to grow them on in my plant room. Like, I'm looking to start hybridizing again, probably this winter. So I actually, in my mind, as I'm going through my plant room, I will look at the plants and watch how they grow, the symmetry, the different things. And then what happens with me is oftentimes I will think, well, this flower, you know, if I cross this with this, I'm going to get potentially combinations of that. But usually it starts with the symmetry, the foliage, and other things like that. That it's like little moments of inspiration when they're in the plant room.
And then when you get your babies, you have to be ruthless too, because
yeah, it's,
Yeah.
you know, you can grow out 100 or more, and you would only get a handful that are actually unique and worth doing anything with.
yeah, you don't want the same thing that there's 20 other plants that look just like it and that, or have a flower on it. Dale says she only when her original cross, she will only put 10 seeds down, and then if she sees that there's promising things resulting from that, then she'll put additional seeds down.
I do kind of the same thing. I'll sow a small container of the seeds so that I'll hold some in reserve, and then grow some. I actually will, as they grow, I will prick some of them out and put them into, you know, like the ones that are growing the quickest. Usually those are the ones that are the more robust ones, and I will transplant them out and see how they're growing, and then kind of do it in shifts, so to speak, so that I can call out the ones that are not so good right away. And usually I look at them in the pots to see how their foliage is growing. You know, is it symmetrical, and are they robust growing? You know, those types of things, so that I can kind of, because you do get a lot of, you know, things that are just very plain, or they're just, you know, they're a pink dropper or a blue dropper, or, you know, get many of those, but you get things that are just not anything unique.
Mm-hmm. And just like Doug said, if you order a seed from the Gesneriad Society, or you get seed on your own plants, not only for room in your growing area, but also for the fact that you might have a crop failure for some reason, is not, I highly recommend not sowing all the seed at one time, because you never know what happens. You know, I do all my seed sowing in little plug trays, and I have those in a plastic sweater box. And most of the time, I don't have to water the little plug tray before I'm going to transplant it. But sometimes for some reason they will, I'll miss looking at it and it has dried out. So I've now lost those seedlings. So it's always a good idea to keep some seed aside for as a backup as well.
Yeah, for me, the part of the whole process that's probably the most where you're going to probably have failure, at least in my experience, was from the time of pollination until the time of harvest. Because so many times if you get powdery mildew or you get something, as that peduncle is, that seed pod is there, if that settles in on it or it settles on anywhere on the stem of that where the seed pod is, you can lose the seed pod as well. So for me, that was the most challenging time, because I wanted them to be on the seed pod to be on the plant for a minimum of 4 months. Otherwise, you wouldn't get anything that was viable. So that, for me, that process or that time frame was always the most difficult, because you could lose it.
And with Primalina, I've had 2 cases where I had a nice seed pod and I waited and waited. I think it took about 3 months for the seed pod to mature. And that was a hybrid pollen on a species. And when the seed pod dried and I went to open it to harvest the seed, there wasn't any seed in the seed pod. So it was a false pregnancy, which is kind of interesting, because you would think that if it's not developing seed, why is there a seed pod developing? But
I had that happen once and it was bizarre. I was so excited about this violet cross, and the pod was growing just fine, and after a while it's starting to dry on the stem and whatever, so I took it off and let it dry and opened it up. There wasn't a single thing in there. I couldn't believe it.
yeah, it's kind of interesting, because you would think that it wouldn't continue. Okay, maybe you could see it getting fat for a couple weeks or something, but then why bother if there's nothing inside?
This did everything that they always do, and it was so weird.
I mean, could you imagine being pregnant for 9 months and go through labor and there's nothing happening?
That's not even funny.
The other thing is, I always like to make my crosses in the fall, so that they seem to hold better during the winter, because there's not as much the heat. If it gets too hot, the stress from that, it's the temp. I have more control over the temperature during the winter. Just the way I always seem to do mine during the winter. Just seemed to be I had more success that way.
Yeah, I found that, which is kind of strange, because you think that most of the Gesneriads that we grow are warm climate loving. So you would think that they would do better if you sowed the seeds during the warmer months. But I grow in an unheated basement, and I find that I have better luck if I plant seed anywhere from November, say, to January or February. And there is some Gesneriad seed like Petrocosmia that will not germinate at all if you sow them in the warmer months. And then, which brings me to another question we get asked is how long does it take for germination? And that could be anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to 6 months. Like alpine Gesneriads can take up to 6 months for the seed to germinate. And that might have something to do with the fact that they're growing in an area that gets snow and cold temperatures. So that they might do better if you did some kind of cold stratification with the seed, but I just usually will use a separate container that I can just set aside and kind of forget about because a watched pot doesn't boil. I keep looking at it. Where are those seedlings? So have some fun and do some pollinating.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, great talk.
Oh, I forgot to ask. I know it probably said it in the EVM, but the show pictures are going to be on the website? Or
The ones that were submitted?
yes.
Yes, I believe
Okay.
so.
Okay.
If you, might be easier if I do, if you go to the main page, it'll show you where it says the show schedule. You click on that link, it'll take you to the schedule of the classes, and then you can click on each class.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
Karen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karen.
I think I'll have some fun. I actually have some Syninga cardinalis seeds and Diastema vexan. Well, the folks who attended my talk on Friday, I showed them, I have some little seedlings of Diastema vexans.
I was getting my shots. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It was
I
recorded.
wanted to.
You motivated me. I was in my plant or
Slump?
trying to organize my potting table a little bit because it's like a zoo. I always say when I'm going to repot that I'm going to wash my pots right away. And then
It doesn't
the
happen.
next thing I know, I've got piles of pots.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that fantasy. Yeah.
I just, like earlier in the summer, I washed some, I decided I was gonna clean all these pots, wash all these pots. I had some pots in there that were in that stack 10 years and I had not washed them because I avoid washing because that to me is the worst part.
Yeah.
And you
Cleaning the
know,
pots.
somebody said, "Oh, I just put the pots in the dishwasher."
Mhm.
Well, first of all, you got to clean the pots
Yeah.
before, because you can't put them in there with all the perlite and the yuck.
Perlite and other stuff
Anyway.
now.
That's
But-
the hard part.
And
I went
okay,
to put
so
them in
they're
my
plastic,
dishwasher.
and I put them on the top rack.
Yeah, me too.
And
I did.
I'm the heat process, the drying process melted a couple of the pots. So
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
do that anymore.
No,
We need one that's made for pots.
Yeah.
That's right.
Rub action, big drain, so you don't have to take all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I
Yeah,
think
I
it
like
was,
what the bars have for washing glasses. They have those brushes that come out.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that would be
And
good.
then
Yes.
soapy water and then swish them on the
Put it
brush.
around.
yeah.
Good ideas.
Yeah, I think it was Paul
Yeah.
in a talk long ago said that he would take his pots and he had a big tub and he would just put the pots in there and just let them soak until he had a chance to get to them. And that way the debris was already loosened.
Mm.
And he might even have included like a little bit of Clorox bleach to
Yeah, I put white
sterilize
vinegar
them.
in. Yeah, the vinegar helps to break down the mineral deposits from the.
Yes, yes.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, if you have hard water.
Yeah, I use those big like buckets that you could get at like Home Depot or something. They're like a big spackle bucket, that size
Yes,
type
yeah.
of thing. And I'll put like a bunch of pots in that. And I'll put my soap, a little bleach. I didn't think about the vinegar. I'm gonna have to try that. And I will let that soak outside, and then I just, if it's a nice day, then I finish cleaning them up while I'm sitting under the trees. But of course, sometimes they're sitting in the water for
And if you go to Home Depot, they have cleaning vinegar now. It's just
Oh.
higher acidity.
Oh, nice.
Oh, nice.
Mm.
Soak them a half hour of soaking and they're ready to wash and put away.
My biggest thing is how do you get some of those labels off? Sometimes I can't get the labels off.
Yeah.
Gugon. Gugon?
Glue gun?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Or you
Gugon,
can-
not goof off. Joe
Yeah.
Recca, but
Where do you get
Gugon.
it, Patty?
Any place, any of the big
At
box
Home
stores.
Depot, yeah.
I've even seen it in, it's like an orange oil.
Okay.
But that's what I used to
yeah.
use at work to
Okay.
get tape off of doors and everything.
I
I
have
think you
seen
can
Yeah,
get
let
it
it
at
sit for a little-
Walmart too.
Yeah, you let it sit for a little bit and then it comes off good.
I
I've
have
been
a
using,
container of Gluon and it's treated towelettes. And you just,
Oh,
yeah,
Oh.
it's so much less messy.
I would think so.
Hmm.
I've been using electrical tape for my labels and that peels off. I'll cut it, let's see, I guess it's 1/2 inch wide and it comes in colors. So I use either yellow or white. And on my labels, besides the plant name, I always try and put where I got the plant from and the month and the year, just so that I have some idea how old the plant is. And then I put the dates that I repot the plant on it. But what I
Barb's
like
got the
about
Gugon.
the electrical tape is I can peel that off and put it on the fresh pot. And that's good for like 2 or 3 repotting sessions.
Nice.
You can also use masking tape, which is a lot cheaper than the electrical tape, but that doesn't sometimes re-stick when you peel it off.
Yeah. And it leaves residue that makes me say bad words.
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, it can. If you leave it on long enough, it'll leave residue. I'm wondering if like artist tape, which is meant to be kind of sticky release, might
They've
also
got
be
like
an option.
painter's tape,
Hmm.
which comes off the wall easy when you've been painting, and that works pretty good. I've used that before.
Yeah, I got it. So that I just didn't want to use the labels on the pot. So another Paul tip, the China markers, China pens, the
Yes.
green pencils. That's what I use. I write right on the pot, and it's very easy to wash off when in hot water. You know,
Yeah,
so
hot soapy water.
hot soapy water comes right off, and all the residue is really kind of, you know, it was, the pots would stick together with the lid, you couldn't get it off, and it was just easier for me. And you can get now with Amazon, you can get a whole like package of them.
It's called
these
China
different-
marker.
Yeah,
China markers, yeah.
yeah,
Huh.
and they're inexpensive, and you can get them in white, black, blue, purple, you know, every color under the sun now.
Oh, I'll have to look into this.
And they're really, and not the ones that you have to, some of them you have to take a string and like unwind, you know, take the paper off. These
Yeah.
are just like a regular that you turn, and it actually has the lead or whatever in there. So you don't have to, you know, it's just like regular automatic pencil type thing. So it's easier to.
Oh, so you can put it in a regular pencil sharpener.
Yeah, well, you don't even need a pencil sharpener really with it, but it's
It
kind of
peels.
like a mechanical pencil type thing.
Oh, okay.
Oh, that's cool, because the peeling ones, they get kind of messy and
Yeah, and
And
they-
usually
they
they're
break
too
and-
thick to, you know, write nicely with.
yes,
Yeah,
that's true.
Yeah,
Especially if you're doing minis and small pots. Yeah, I used to use China markers almost exclusively for a while, but I've switched to, if it's a solo cup that I know I'm only going to use once, you know, I'll use a marker.
that's.
Because you're
that's
gonna
what I
just
do
toss
too.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I just toss them, and it's easier.
Tips and trivia.
All
Oh,
right.
Bob, I forgot to ask you, are you still looking for plants for next year?
Oh, yeah, we'll never have enough plants for sale again.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Okay, because I'm bagging up some stuff I was gonna send out to you, and then I figured that I would ask before I did that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know if I'm gonna be on later tonight because I'm kind of